Hello, it's 2 p.m. here in Paris. You're watching France 24 with me, Claire Pride, and these are the top stories. Italy's Giuseppe Conte accepts a fresh mandate to try to form a new government. This after the Democratic Party and Five Star Movement agreed to form a joint administration. From outrage to action, the UK's opposition Labour Party is to seek an emergency debate next week to try to stop a no-deal Brexit. This a day after the Queen approved the government's request to suspend Parliament for a month. And pro-government forces hit by airstrikes in Yemen, a day after they re-entered Aden. The southern city was seized by previously allied separatists earlier this month. We need to exit the political uncertainty soon, the words of Giuseppe Conte today after meeting President Sergio Mattarella, who's tasked him with securing a pact between Italy's Democratic Party and the Five Star Movement, which until recently governed with the League Party. League leader Matteo Salvini had hoped for fresh elections. Julia Kim reports.
A turning point in Italy's political crisis. Just a week after resigning, Giuseppe Conte re-emerged from his meeting with President Sergio Mattarella with his old job back and a fresh mandate to form a coalition government with the populist Five Star Movement and centre-left Democratic Party. In a blow for Matteo Salvini and his far-right League Party, Italy's Prime Minister said the new administration would promote unity and inclusivity.
It will be a government for the good of the citizens, to modernise the country, to make our nation even more competitive in the international context, but also more just, more supportive and more inclusive.
Conte's premiership is one of the very few points of agreement between the Five Star Movement and Democratic Party. Sworn enemies in the past, the two parties put aside their differences on Wednesday, agreeing to form an alliance to block a power grab from Salvini. Earlier this month, the Interior Minister withdrew his party from the former coalition, hoping for early elections, a move he believed would propel him to the premiership. But Italy's latest political crisis isn't over yet. The new government still has to win a confidence vote in both chambers of parliament. If no new coalition is formed, President Mattarella says he'll dissolve the assembly, triggering elections 3.5 years ahead of schedule.
Joining me now from Rome is Jan Zelonka. He teaches European politics at the University of Oxford in the UK. Hello, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us. So, Giuseppe Conte then accepting another mandate to try to form a new government. How tough is this going to be, do you think?
It will be tough, but this is the government of last chance for Italy and for Europe. Because if this government fails, then we can expect really a government by Salvini and Meloni, which is extreme right-wing and really incompatible with the rest of the continent.
How embarrassing would you say what's happening right now is for Matteo Salvini? Because he, of course, triggered this crisis. He was hoping there would be elections that he could win, and obviously didn't count on the possibility of his opponents actually teaming up to stop him.
Well, Mr. Salvini could read history book about Italian politics rather than tweeting all the time. He would know that constitutions assumes that elections are being done once upon 5 years, unless something really extraordinary happens and there is no alternative majority in the parliament. Constitutions doesn't say anything about opinion polls. He should know. It talks about parliamentary majority, but his rather awkward style alienated most of parliamentarians, and not only.
Does he have a point, though, when he says that this alliance isn't likely to last either? Because, of course, these are former rivals, serious rivals coming together now. So it could be quite a fragile coalition.
Yes, but the previous coalitions, as we learned, was fragile too, and this is the new world of politics, of post-truth, tweeting, and media decadence. You know, the truth is that this is a coalition of two parties who still believe in Europe in some way. This is a coalition of parties who are both left-wing. They have been competitors for some time, but I think now they realize that this conflict between them is basically counterproductive. And I believe that Prime Minister Conte is the right man to lead this coalition.
I was going to ask you about that. What makes him the right man?
Look, Conte was just professor of law in Florence, and nobody outside academic circle knew him or heard of him. And he proved over last year a formidable politician who understands not just the role of constitutions and institutions, but also has a lot of political sense of what can be done and not can be done under circumstances, difficult circumstances Italy found itself. Look, this government needs support not only of Italian parliamentarians, it needs also support of Europe, because the current corset of particular financial and migratory arrangements in Europe are not suited for the situations of Italy today.
And Europe, or Brussels rather, watching this very closely, I imagine, because drafting a budget is going to be a top priority for the new government, isn't it?
Yes, but if Brussels was somewhat flexible towards Salvini, Di Maio government, it should be even more flexible towards the new government. And in fact, we have seen successes of that kind of coalitions. Look at Portugal. Portugal has also a government created by the alliance of left-leaning forces, some establishment forces, some anti-establishment, but they somehow put their differences aside and made a success of it. And now are performing, for instance, on some economic indicators like unemployment, but also debt, much better than other countries. So Portugal is a model to follow. This can work. It doesn't mean that it will work. Salvini is down, but he's certainly not out.
Okay, Jan Zielonka, thank you very much indeed for your time and your analysis. In other news, the outrage is phony. That's the reaction in the UK of Commons leader Jacob Rees-Mogg after Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament sparked protests across the country. A day after Jeremy Corbyn described the move as a smash and grab on our democracy, his Labour Party has announced plans for an emergency debate next week to try to stop a no-deal Brexit. Now here's our correspondent in London, Benedict Pevio.
This surprise announcement yesterday, certainly the timing of it, because Parliament is in summer recess, MPs are on holiday, they're not due to come back, and Parliament is not due to reconvene till next Tuesday. So I think it caught a lot of people by surprise, including the media here. Certainly, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is indeed facing a furious backlash after planning to suspend Parliament, and that's because he wants a new Queen's speech on the 14th of October. He is entitled to do that, is allowed to do that, sought a permission. He requested it from the head of state, the Queen, and she gave that permission and that green light yesterday afternoon. So interesting, because you've got the government on the one hand going on the airwaves, coming out all guns blazing in a sense. So the leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg, has said today that those, to quote him, that those opposed to Brexit should either seek to change the law or change the government. And concretely, that's exactly what the opposition is going to try and do next week. They had a meeting the day before yesterday, so before the prorogation announcement, the suspension of Parliament, trying to plan their strategy for next week. But of course, this has become even more urgent because prorogation means that there will be even fewer days in which MPs can actually try and stop a no deal. So concretely, what the Labour Party are doing next week is that they will seek, they say, an emergency debate next Tuesday. You've got the Liberal Democrats also confirming today that they're going to work cross-party to stop a no-deal Brexit and prevent that proroguing of Parliament. Now, if the opposition does succeed in seizing control of Parliament next week, what we could see are very rapid developments of them trying to pass a law to stop the Prime Minister from approving a no deal. In other words, for the Prime Minister to, by the 31st of October, for the UK to leave the EU, the 27 other EU countries, without a deal. The next option, a nuclear option in a sense, would be for the opposition, and that's only the Labour leader, the main opposition party that can request that, is a motion of no confidence in the Prime Minister.
Some news from Colombia now, and one of the main negotiators of 2016's peace deal, Iván Márquez, has called on his followers to take up arms. This in a video in which he reads out a statement. Márquez was a commander in the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC. He's accused the state of betraying 2016's agreement. And now we turn our attention to Yemen, where pro-government forces have been hit near the southern port city of Aden. That's according to a Yemeni commander who says at least 30 troops were killed. This a day after forces loyal to the government re-entered Aden. It's been almost 3 weeks since they lost the city to separatists who've also been fighting against Houthi rebels. Armin Georgian, our international affairs editor, joins me now. Armin, we've long focused on the fight between Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition supporting the government. But of course, there are several sides in this conflict. Tell us more about these separatists who want an independent southern Yemen.
Yeah, so in a sense, you've got three main entities or three main players. You've got the Houthi rebels, you've got the internationally recognized government, and you've got the southern separatists. And it's true that for the first 3 years of this war, media was generally focusing on the fight between the Houthi rebels and the Yemeni government. But this third factor is now really coming to prominence in the media. That's the southern separatists. These are fighters loyal to the Southern Transitional Council, or STC. You have to understand that there's a long history behind this, because southern Yemen was actually independent from 1967 until Yemen was unified in 1990. But there are long been calls for independence, or at least a very high degree of autonomy for southern Yemen. And protests began in 2007 for independence, something called the Southern Movement, or Al-Hirak. So 2007, that was already quite a few years before this war actually started, which is generally dated back to March 2015. But even in 2015, during the Battle of Aden, we saw armed groups from the south pushing back, both against the Yemeni government and against Houthi rebel incursions into the south. So they've definitely been a constant presence, but perhaps not talked about as much as the other main players in this conflict.
So several internal players, also external players. Tell us what this means for the external players.
Well, this fighting is coming against the backdrop of a rift between the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Those two countries have obviously been in this Arab coalition in Yemen that's been fighting the Houthi rebels and conducting airstrikes and so forth. We now have this show of force by the southern separatists, who are close to the United Arab Emirates. And it's hard to imagine this kind of show of force by the southern separatists if there hadn't been a rift between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, because as long as the Saudi Arabia and the UAE were close, were sticking together, it would have been more difficult in a way for the southern separatists sort of to show that they're sort of coming to the forefront, if you will. So I think you have to understand this latest fighting in the context of that rift. I suppose the bigger question is, what does this rift between the UAE and Saudi Arabia mean for the broader war, and particularly for the war against the Houthi rebels? Because the Emiratis have actually had military trainers on the ground. They've had a presence on the ground. They're withdrawing those military trainers. So the question is, does that weaken the coalition then against the Houthi rebels? And in terms of the broader picture, of course, all this shows that the chaos is, if anything, deepening in Yemen, Claire, despite the international peace efforts and the Stockholm Agreement. They're still fighting around Hodeidah, and really the deepening chaos can only benefit jihadist groups in Yemen.
Thank you for your analysis, Armin. A skull discovered in Ethiopia is casting new light on the progress of human evolution. It dates back 3.8 million years. Colin Kinneborough has the story.
It was on this site in the Afar region of Ethiopia that researchers made the landmark discovery. Dubbed MRD, it's a nearly complete skull of an early human ancestor that lived 3.8 million years ago, providing insight into a pivotal period for human evolution.
This is really a game changer in a lot of ways, and answers old questions that we've had lingering around for decades.
The fossil belongs to a species known as Australopithecus annamensis, which first appeared roughly 4.2 million years ago. It possessed a mixture of ape-like and human-like characteristics. The species is considered the direct ancestor of Australopithecus afarensis, best known from the partial skeleton nicknamed Lucy, which dates from about 3.2 million years ago. That skeleton was unearthed in 1974, just over 50 kilometers from the site where MRD was unearthed in 2016. MRD now joins Lucy as a key to understanding early human ancestors. Until now, the only skull remains of the annamensis species were isolated jaw fragments and teeth. The cranium was a crucial missing piece. What it shows is an evolution that was not linear, but more side by side, with the two Australopithecus species coexisting for about 100,000 years.
The key point here is that afarensis overlapped in time with Australopithecus annamensis. That changed the whole mode of evolution.
It would be more than 3 million years before these human ancestors gave rise to Homo sapiens. With this discovery, scientists are one step closer to understanding how we evolved.